already messing up. So good morning, everyone. Associate Commissioner Greta Hilton was unable to join us this morning, so she asked that I do the welcome, and I'm very honored to do so. My name is Veronica Sullivan. I'm the Director of the Division of IDEA Implementation in Preschool, which oversees gifted and talented education in Kentucky. So I just want to say today is a super exciting day, and I hope that those of you who are here, or maybe those of you who are online and closer, can join us for the signing of the proclamation for Gifted Education Month, which will be happening today at noon. Let me double check that with Dr. Roberts. But so I think it's exciting that we're able to celebrate the students and the teachers that support gifted education. And I'm really excited to join that event. I was able to join last year, and sorry, I'm doing a plug for that because it's an exciting day. And it was just great. I always enjoy seeing the students and watching their exhibit their talent. So it's just awesome. So if you can't make it this year, I suggest you make it sometime. So, okay. So just want to say thank you and welcome. And for those of you joining online, the weather is not great. We know that, but I appreciate your dedication and taking the time to join us. Anything else I'm supposed to do? Sure.
Thank you so much for providing the welcome. Since Greta couldn't be here, her schedule's crazy, as you know, and so we really appreciate you and Natasha being here with us today.
So I think I'm supposed to just quickly go over the purpose of the council. The council's purpose is to make recommendations regarding the provisions of services for gifted and talented students in Kentucky's education system. Okay. Thank you.
Great. Dr. Roberts.
Welcome. I'm happy to see those of you who gathered here in Frankfurt, and also to see each of you who is online with us today. I will call roll. Katie Booth. Shanandra Bradford.
Shandidra, I'm here.
Nidra, my apologies. Write it out phonetically so I can do it better. Lindsay Burton.
I'm here.
Kimberly Code.
Present.
Randy Corbett.
Present.
Lynn Covington.
Present.
Byron Darnell. Mason Tyre.
Here.
Hannah England.
Here.
Kirk Haynes.
Here.
Jessica Hastings.
Present.
Philip Cash. Jean Lee.
Here.
Tiffany Marshall. Brenda Martin. John Maxey.
Present.
Kim Nettleton.
Here.
And I believe that is everyone.
We do have a quorum.
And I believe the next thing on our agenda is for Nicole Fields to be with us. Is that correct?
We actually want to review the meeting minutes of the previous meeting prior to Nicole.
It's minutes. Sorry about that. You've had an opportunity to see the minutes from our last session. Are there any amendments, any changes you suggest? Then would someone make a motion to approve the minutes?
I motion to approve the minutes.
A second?
Second. Kirk Haynes.
Thank you. All those in favor say aye.
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 Kind of awkward, isn't it, when we're on
And
online? Okay,
before Dr. Fields gives her presentation, I can just review the meeting norms real quick, if that's
that
okay.
would be perfect. So the minutes passed as presented.
Thank you. Just a review of our meeting norms. Members must keep their cameras on. Members must speak when called on for roll call or any voting. The meeting is being live streamed through the KDE media portal and being recorded. A reminder to stay focused on the topic today and the agenda at hand for the sake of time. Raised hand and chat can be used for questions. Additional feedback can be provided through the meeting exit slip. Our secretary is taking notes, and Kathy and I store and manage documents. And remember, any travel vouchers for those on site are sent electronically through email to Kathy. So thank you so much for being here. And I think turn it back over to you, Dr. Roberts, and prep for Dr. Fields' presentation.
Well, it's Dr. Field here.
I
Yes.
am.
Oh, good. Absolutely. Well, you are presenting on a topic that is very important to all of us.
Yes.
And it seems that we in gifted education, as we're always looking to ensure or to work toward having underrepresented groups have numbers that would be similar to those in the school. Your topic could not be more important to us. I welcome you.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here this morning. And I will say some of the examples I will give you will be personal. I have two sons. One is identified as gifted academically, and the other son is identified in the world of visual arts. So we have experienced this path of gifted and talented very differently between the two sons. So I'm gonna go ahead and share my presentation and get started. Can I get a thumbs up if you see the screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. So thank you again for having me this morning. My name is Dr. Fields, and I work in the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging team. Our vision and mission and theory of action. So as we know, KDE has a vision, and that is each and every student empowered, equipped to pursue a successful future. But within the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging team, we wanted to take a step further. We want each student and educator in Kentucky feels a sense of belonging. Our mission is to create and deepen partnerships to remove long-standing barriers to equity by providing supports and developing an equity lens, elevating student and educator voice, and promoting inclusive, equitable, and healing communities. We take this work into our theory of action by saying if we do each of these elements in our mission, then we will accomplish the vision that we have for every student and educator to feel a sense of belonging. And this is true and why I'm speaking today about gifted and talented and how these two can work together. With our vision, we have three pillars in which we're looking through. We're looking through developing our equity lens. We have an equity playbook, is what I'm going to talk to you about today and how we're utilizing that. We have the equity dashboard, and we're going to talk about how the two work together. We have asynchronous modules that we're working on that you can get out there on KET to deepen your work in this work. We have the, what is his name? I can't think of his name right now. And he's doing a series through NKECS. And we have the trauma-informed care practices. We do this by elevating the voices of our students, our educators, our communities through our communities of practice. So every month we meet with the KDE internal DEIB team, in which every agency has two representatives. We have our 8 co-ops, and then we have our district partners that we meet with every month to review this work and how we can work together as a community. We have our newsletter. We work with supporting the Student Advisory Council, and our podcast is coming really soon. It's called Lifting Kentucky's Voices. We provide inclusive and healing communities by making sure that we are stressing race-based stress and trauma. We have a calming space grant. We review our SCL implementation guide that Heather Busherman is working on. And I'm excited that our KET Safe Spaces courses are rolling out very soon. Now, you may have heard about this equity playbook and like, what is this playbook? Well, we have partnered with a company called Engage to Learn, and they're working together to provide individualized coaching to address equity through the individualized coaching and using evidence-based research practices. There are 5 pillars in which we're looking at within our equity playbook. student achievement, utilizing of funding and resources, disproportionality relative to student discipline, culture and climate, and highly effective staff and highly quality instruction resources. This is really important when we're talking about gifted and talented, because we're really looking at student achievement. The playbook is not a physical book. It's not a program or intervention that you can just buy off the shelf. It is a tool, a system of support. Again, it's individualized coaching. So in order to get this coaching, you have to think about what is your problem of practice. Every district, every school participant will choose their problem of practice related to whatever one of the 5 pillars. We have one particular school that is looking at gifted and talented. We help them narrow their problem of practice by looking at these 3 circles. It's your circle of control, your circle of influence, and your circle of concern. It's important to understand the difference between what we control and what we influence. To control means to have complete authority over. To influence is to support, engage, or empower. Both of these circles can play an important role in determining impact and relevant options. In order to determine what is actually within our sphere of influence, we must identify our concerns. And those concerns, what things do we have influence over? And finally, in those things we have influence over, what can we explicitly control? So when I'm talking to teachers and one of the teachers is saying, I really want to look at having more students of color in the gifted and talented program. And so my question to her is, what do you have control over? What is your circle of influence? And what is your circle of concern? And we work through this. The first thing we look at, and this is the the whole state data, when we look at disproportionality, you can see from my equity dashboard, we're looking at gifted and talented, the advanced coursework, CTE, coursework, and CTE completion. All of the dots are in the orange are underrepresented in those categories. If we look at the top left under gifted and talented, we see that African American, Black students, Hispanic students are underrepresented in the gifted and talented area, as well as in advanced coursework. As we go down at the bottom on the second box on the left, we see that we are allowing and putting students in this opportunity for CTE. However, they are not completing this coursework. So there's a disconnect once we have students into this work. And we often see this sometimes when it comes to gifted and talented. I will say, as a parent, it was interesting the barriers that we had to face with my 2 sons. One being gifted and talented academically, providing enrichment opportunities for him, and then the other recognizing that he was gifted in visual arts because it was pushed for academic. Both young men excelled very well in school. Both young men had different views when it comes to gifted and talented. The boys were fortunate to have 2 parents in the field of education in which we could advocate. So I am working with, as a parent for my daughter's elementary, on their advisory board to really advocate for parents who don't understand how to navigate those waters. So most importantly, when I'm talking to educators, I always try to make sure that they are providing information, common language when it comes to how you navigate gifted and talented, how they identify. Because sometimes as parents, we see things, our students being gifted, and there may be a disconnect. And so how do I advocate to say my son or daughter is really, truly gifted in this area? And the equity playbook really has been very powerful in helping to provide that individualized coaching to help teachers and educators look at those gaps. So we use the equity dashboard to pull the information, we help them develop their problem of practice, and then we begin our coaching. We have 3 cohorts. Our first cohort has 222 participants. 79 are district leaders, 52 are school counselors or instructional coaches, as well as they may be a Frisky, and we have 91 teachers in our first cohort. Our first cohort also has an overview of many districts that are participating. Our upcoming cohorts just began, cohort 2 began in January last month with 60 participants, and cohort 3 will begin in August of 2023. In addition to, not only are we using quantitative data, we are encouraging them to use qualitative data. This meaning we've done book studies with street data and coaching for equity. We teach students and educators teachers and educators to utilize the teacher-student interaction tracking tool. This tool is simply, you follow a student around for a day. You see how many positive interactions they have received, positive comments. You can track what are they receiving in their classes. And so utilizing that data, you can take that back and say, we see that we have all of these, this one particular African-American male, he may have not received any positive comments. He is not in any classes that he feels is challenging him. He says that he is bored, but maybe he is a student that we just didn't identify early that could be gifted. This will be challenging to do with every student in the building, but I encourage you to utilize your administrative team, your counselors, your friskies, maybe an AIC coach to perhaps go in and utilize this tool. Because again, this is another way to get data that you can see that probably can help when it looks to identifying students that are not listed and gifted and talented. We are excited to be partnering with Conscious Classroom to developing some professional developments. One of the things this book talks about is providing students the windows, the mirrors, and the sliding doors. When we are providing students windows, we're providing them an opportunity to see diverse cultures outside of what they see every day. And oftentimes I get this question posed when I'm in districts that are not as diverse, but I tell them we have this wonderful thing called an internet, so we can bring in visualizations that they can see. We also can do this through books, and we also can bring people in to talk to our students. Again, mirrors allow them to see themselves in authentic representations and not just in simple things of art or work. But you can see, if I was a Hispanic student, I can see that I'm losing my train of thought. I can see that there are educators that look like me. When I worked at a particular high school that had 90% free and reduced lunch rate, we had a 50% two or more races, and the challenging in a 30% Hispanic and 20% other. The challenge that we had in that particular school was not being able to provide mirrors for students to see themselves. So we wanted to make sure that we're bringing people in that look like our students. And most importantly, we provide sliding doors. This is providing opportunities that they do not typically get to engage into. We do this by field trips. You can do this by virtual field trips as well. But it's important that we are providing windows, mirrors, and sliding doors of opportunity for all of our students. And this is particularly important for gifted, if we're identifying gifted students. Sometimes I know that my son that is tested well in visual arts may not test it as strongly as my son that tested for gifted in academically, but did not mean that he wasn't gifted. And the one thing that I really did appreciate about his art teacher, she allowed him to go to different places. We went to different museums. She provided us opportunities and free tickets to go places so he can develop in the world of art. So that's what I mean by sliding door opportunities. What can we do to better enhance what our students are receiving? So we do this by components of assets of pedagogy. When academic knowledge and skills are suited within the lived experience, frames of reference for students, they are more personally meaningful, have higher interest appeal, and learn more easily and thoroughly. This is so important. When we took our son to the art museum, his eyes just glowed. He was excited to be able to have this opportunity to learn more about the arts. When we took our son to Western Kentucky, the oldest one, for their gifted programs, it was great for him to dig deeper into science because he loved it. Because again, when they live those experiences, they're more meaningful to them. It provides them a strong knowledge base of the cultural diversity. We can see it in our curriculum that we're doing. It provides high expectations for the students and all of our educators. And most importantly, in our department, we don't only just go and do presentations, but we are actually trying to support our Commonwealth. You see us here, you see Dr. Chang, she's actually training on the equity dashboard. I'm partnering with the Pritchard Committee to ensure that we are getting our families, our communities involved and having conversations about gifted and talented and those opportunity gaps that we're missing. We have Heather Bushman out talking to counselors, and we have Dr. Sweeney. He's also coaching other educators. With that being said, the uniqueness about our team, not only do we bring in and we have those opportunities to talk about gaps, we bring in our personal experiences. So gifted and talented for me as Dr. Fields, the community engagement coordinator, is just as important as Nicole, the mom, when I'm talking to families about gifted and talented. So that is the end of my presentation. I want to say thank you for having me. Thank you for allowing me to have the space to talk to you about DEIB and the importance of recognizing that in gifted and talented.
Dr. Fields, thank you so much. I'm sure people will have questions for you.
Absolutely.
And
And
Kathy and Joe, you can help by recognizing a hand or
okay, Jessica Hastings, I think, had a raised hand. Jessica?
Dr. Fields, thank you. I'm a representative on this committee, and you mentioned your younger daughter and being on an advisory group for her school. And I was curious if that's because her school was identified as a school for that cohort, or if it was something that any local school could introduce.
I'm actually on the Friskies Advisory Committee. And so because I'm on the Frisky Advisory Committee and they work with the family and community, I am there to help talk about gifted and talented. How can we ensure that more families are learning about this? So it is coming out more in newsletters. We're using common language. We're able to talk to families. So when we have literacy night, we're making sure that families are learning about it. When they have math night, when we had our cultural international cultural celebration at the school, the conversation is still there. It is not a let's take a COGAT test and yes you have and no you don't. It is a constant fluid conversation. So that's the role that I see that I play on that committee, to make sure that this is constant in conversations as we talk to families.
Kirk Haynes?
Good morning. Dr.
Good
Fields,
morning.
speak to local norming in a district or local norming at the school level.
Local norming. So when it comes to GT, well, I know that oftentimes when we go into the school, we're actually doing we're partnering this year on consolidated monitoring. And that's one of the things that we're looking at. And we all went together a couple weeks ago to a district. And so we're looking at how are they identifying, we pull this information from the dashboard. We have one-on-one conversations with the principals, selected educators, and even students to get their voices on the ones that are identified and the ones that are not. So we can look at how can we better put systems in place and practices to better identify those gaps. So I will say that our team is doing that this year. As far as districts, I know districts all should have teams that work with gifted and talented and training their teachers. I know when I was a previous counselor, we often got several PDs on how to help support and identify our students. And as the working in my school, I will work with our GT coach and our teachers to help ensure that we were properly identifying those opportunity gaps that we had with students who were not getting identified, and what were the barriers to getting more students identified. So we worked through those problems of practice. I hope I answered your question.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions? Yeah, Pauline.
Hi, Dr. Fields. Thank you for your presentation. This is Pauline Covington, and I represent middle schools, specifically out of Fayette County. My question is, how is KDE helping each district ensure a more equitable identification process? I know, I understand that you're developing the cohorts, but what is your vision for streamlining in a way districts to identify through the lens of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging?
Well, the equity playbook has been monumental because it does give individualized coaching. And we are still in the midst of cohort 1, collecting data to take it back and say, okay, these are the gaps. This is what we see. How can we streamline this? How can we get this out to more educators, to more districts, which is hence why we have these asynchronous modules are coming out based off the feedback that we have received on how to better do this. But it's interesting because, again, it's individualized, so every district looks different. And so we try to first, with our team, go in and help individual districts, support them individually, because it's nice to say that this is the cookie cutter, what you need to do, but it may not work with that particular district. So I think the one uniqueness about our team is that we're able to go out and help identify those areas to help kind of streamline that process. So there will be guidance coming, but we try to personalize that coaching. And this is why the equity playbook has been monumental in doing that. So we will have more data coming as we go through more of this coaching in cohort 1. So when cohort 2 just began, we have data to say, okay, this is what's working. This is how we can help support them. Because again, there are 5 pillars in this. So not everyone is working on the same pillar, but the ones that are working and the gifted and talented, that data has been monumental to help us with the following cohorts. But we may have to tweak it because every district looks very differently. So that's why we kind of like the individualization of it all. And that's the uniqueness of our team. So I will say KDE has done a phenomenal job of first creating the diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging team to even have this lens to go in and help support students and educators. And from there, we get information to help recognize those gaps, to help improve that process of identifying students.
I imagine Fayette County is or will be included in one of the cohorts, possibly.
They're in cohort 2, if I'm not mistaken. If they're not 2, they're 3. But
Okay.
they're in this equity playbook because they are working with KEDC. Am I saying it right? Or CKEC? I always get my regional co-ops mixed up, but they're working with Andy, Letitia, or Dr. McComas. Those are the 3 coordinators that are in that regional coordinating, helping lead this work.
Okay, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
And so will you all be coming out with sharing stories or highlights or best practices from the cohorts? I assume all of that will be shared.
Yes, all of that will be shared soon. So we're excited to share that work. We have highlighted a few stories in the DEIB newsletter that comes out. And this month we are getting personal testimonies from the coachees. We're working with Scott County, Woodford, I'm missing some. Marion County. I think that's the 3. I'm interviewing them, so I'll put their testimonies in the newsletter. So I'm super excited to share with you from cohort 1 their experiences with the coaching.
That's very exciting. Any other questions?
But thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Dr. Fields. Appreciate your presentation and hope you have a great day.
You too. Y'all have a great one.
I want to thank you as well, and I want to say to everyone who's here, let's always be thinking of how we interact, because with other components within KDE and other organizations, because what you do impacts gifted kids. And if you're talking about the issues that you keep the idea of advanced kids buoyant in the conversation, everyone wins.
Everyone
So
wins.
what you do matters for gifted kids, and what we do matters for you. So we need to work together.
Absolutely. And anytime we can work together, please reach out. We love to partner.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. So I want to share with you some best practices from gifted and talented cadre leaders that align with our priorities. So there are several gifted and talented cadres from across the state that meet to support and provide resources for the districts in their regions. The Office of Special Education and Early Learning, which is the office I work in, OCEAL, meets with the GT cadre leaders and facilitators after each of our SACGTE meetings to discuss best practices and resources and to share GT news and information. During our last meeting, the GT cadre leader members provided best practices that align to the priorities of our council. Let's take a look at the suggestions. To review, here is priority number 1, and it says recommend that KDE supports districts in identification practices and services that are equitable for all students, including those who are twice exceptional, English learners, students with racial and ethnic groups, all socioeconomic students, and students with special considerations to remove barriers for equal opportunity and access. Let's look at the best practices being utilized by districts of the cadre members. The first priority deals with equity and identification. For this practice, a list is created that includes students who may have been missing some criteria or need additional assessments for the committee to make a decision on the student's identification for the GT program. The next best practice is about the GT Selection and Placement Committee. This committee is responsible for reviewing student evidence to the regulation identification criteria and deciding if the student meets the program criteria. For this best practice, a list is created with students who may have been missing some criteria or need more assessment for the committee to make a decision on the student's identification for the GT program. The third practice is about creating standard operating procedures, SOPs. SOPs ensure there are procedures which are implemented with consistency and fidelity. This district has created SOPs for special considerations to assist the committee as they consider exceptions to the criteria. Exceptions to the identification must be considered if the student's environment, culture, or disabling condition causes the student's gifts to be masked. When a student's gifts are masked, the student is less likely to be considered for gifted program. So this is a continuation. I need to go back, Joe, one slide. This is a continuation of some best practices. So on this slide, professional development regarding GT identification and GT students is listed. The district addresses identification not only in faculty meetings, but in professional learning communities, PLCs, and grade level team discussions. In this manner, there are opportunities for one-on-one discussions with district staff. Another way districts are ensuring equity and identification is to ensure accommodations are provided to students during GT screening and assessments. We'll discuss this more as we look at best practices for priority number 2. Using local norms, something somebody brought up a few minutes ago, to provide equity and identification at the school level is another best practice. Local norms used at the school building level is also research-based. Research shows that when students are compared to peers who have similar demographics, there is better equitable representation from underrepresented populations in each school district in the school. Each school in the district, excuse me. Cognitive assessments have several tests to measure a student's abilities. If a student scores well in verbal or quantitative subtests, this could be an indicator the student could be gifted in language arts or math. This information could allow the district to assess the student in these gifted categories as well as general intellectual ability. So I know that's a lot of information to throw at you. So I'm going to pause just for a second to see if anybody has any questions or comments before I go on about the other best practices. Seeing no questions or comments, I'm going to go on to priority number 2. So this is the council's priority number 2, clarity on accommodations for GT identification and testing. And the priority states that we're going to recommend that KDE communicate and provide guidance and resources to school districts and families that assessment and accommodations must be provided to students who have an individual education program, IEP, or 504 program plan. Excuse me. Right. So let's look at some best practices for priority number 2. So collaboration is the key to communication. In the first best practice on this slide, we see that GT staff are collaborating with other building and district staff to ensure accommodations are provided on GT assessments to students who have IEPs, 504 plans, or program services plans. Another best practice to ensure student accommodations are provided is to address accommodations in the district's gifted procedures. Any questions or comments about that? Right, if not, let's go on to the next slide. This is priority number 3, social emotional supports for GT students. So this priority states that recommend that KDE contact districts to highlight the importance of social emotional learning needs of our gifted students and gather resources that various role groups, such as school psychologists, counselors, teachers, and parents, can use to address the needs of our students. So what are the GT leaders implementing as best practices to support GT students socially and emotionally? Let's go to the next slide, Joe. So here are some best practices. School counselors are providing social emotional supports to GT students and keeping a log of these services. They are also providing intentional one-on-one communication when they give GT students their Gifted Student Services Plan, GSSPs. GT cadre leaders are providing opportunities for conversations between transitional grade levels to ensure staff know about the students who may have special social emotional needs. Go on to the next slide. Here are some other best practices continued for priority number 3. The cadre gave an example of using a curriculum entitled, I'm Not Just Gifted, which meets the social and emotional needs of GT students. In this district, each school has access to the curriculum. Another best practice being used is that all students are assessed with a social emotional screener. The data is collected and shared with counselors and the curriculum team. The last best practice is about getting to know students. District staff meet with every 8th through 11th grader to discuss class choices and graduation requirements. This allows district staff an opportunity to get to know the student's interests, and then the district provides mentorship with community members or others who may assist the students in their pathway interest. So these are just some of the best practices that are being implemented across our state. Does anybody have any questions or comments?
I have a question, and that is regard to priority number 2, where, as I understand, there's a best practice that there's a collaborative environment between GT teachers and other providers like BACs, directors of special ed, directors of English learners, to ensure that the accommodations are being implemented. Because education is there's so many gears moving at the same time, I can see how sometimes that information could be lost in the plethora of lists, checklists, and things to do for a BAC, especially when, for example, I guess the example that I can think of is when in my building, students in 8th grade are being tested to enter into a math and science program. Well, because it seems disconnected in terms of who is the person implementing the test versus the students taking it versus the actual teachers in the building. There was a question that came up the other day about, is this student receiving accommodations? Because usually, well, on his 504, they have that the student needs extended time. Well, also in this situation, even though the student needed extended time, there's also a situation where he also needed to be taking his medication. And so if it wasn't for someone who had his interests in mind, that could have easily been lost in that list of things to remember. And so who's responsible for that? How can we streamline those priorities? Because it is a priority when it comes to a change in someone's schedule to take this identifying test, who needs accommodations such as extended time and a break to take his medicine, and also to take into consideration that this extended time goes into lunch and so many things. So that's one thing that I wanted to point out. Another thing I wanted to point out is more of a personal experience. In a parent-teacher conference with my 4th graders teacher, she mentioned that my daughter did not seem to have scored within the requirements for being identified for language arts. So she did not qualify for being pulled out for extra services. However, when she was assessed in the Spanish language, and though I'm a Spanish teacher, our language at home is still English. I'm not a native Spanish speaker. However, she scored at a upperclassman high school level when it came to reading and speaking and listening. So her teacher said, let's take a look and collaborate with the GT teacher to see what else we could do to possibly identify her for more services, because the teacher didn't want her to be bored. She wanted to continue to stretch her brain. But even after she took a test, it doesn't appear that she scored within a certain amount, a certain level. So yes, I love that Dr. Fields and Dr. Roberts and we're all talking about the qualitative data. But my question, and perhaps it's just put out there on the record, is once we have that data, once she is allowed to take a test or he is allowed to take a test, and they're still not performing at a certain level in the English language, but the student is performing at a certain level in the Spanish language, how do you reconcile those those nuances? Because surely my student is not the only one. And can those exceptions be made, or how does one address that? And also the situation extends to my experience as a teacher, because I have a student whose first language is not English, and she's superbly gifted. But according to the list that we as teachers receive for services that give students opportunities for enrichment, I don't see her name on the list. And so, you know, are observations like mine worthy of those special considerations as both a parent and as an educator?
That's a really good question. And so when you look at the regulation and it talks about these exceptions or special considerations that have to be made, it's in the same section that talks about the GT Selection and Placement Committee. And I didn't get into all that because I was mainly giving information about the best practices that the cadre leaders wanted to share. But when you look at the regulation, it talks about there has to be exceptions or special considerations that staff have to consider these. And it's any type of disability, be it cultural, environmental, that might mask that student's gifts and talents to keep them from being referred. And so it's really important that our Gifted and Talented Committee understand that as they look at the students and their evidence that are brought to the committee to review. Because we want to look at the whole student. The criteria or the regulation talks about that districts have to have policies and procedures for screening and identifying students that ensure equity for all students, especially for underrepresented populations. So it also lists in the regulations those people who should be on this GT Selection and Placement Committee in Section 1, subsection 17. And some of the, it says, put up here real quick. The last part of that is other appropriate personnel who follow district policies and procedures. So the regulation is pretty broad there as they talk about who can be on the committee. So if there are people in the district who they feel like should be on the committee to speak for those children, who know those children, then they could be invited to be part of this committee.
Perhaps ESL teachers, for example.
Right. And so it's a district decision for many of the choices that are made. So I hope that helps.
Oh, yes. And Kathy, can you remind me of where we can find the regulation?
Yes. If you go to the KDE website, you just type in gifted. One of the web pages that comes up is resources, and the regulation is at the top of that page.
Thank you.
Yeah, we have some questions here. Let's start with Hannah England.
Yes, hello, good morning. I just had a quick question. You had mentioned a curriculum with said, I'm not just gifted. Do you have more information about that curriculum or how we could access that?
I don't have a lot of information about that, Hannah. I know that Fayette County is the district that's using this curriculum. So you might reach out to Julie Gann, who's one of the gifted and talented facilitators there in Fayette County.
Okay, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
We have two more questions, and one is, I'm not sure who the person is, because there's a phone number listed. Because I know Jessica has a question, but then there's a 606-618-8125. And there's no video for that person.
Hello.
Yeah, is that Bryn? If you have your hand raised, can you ask a question? Not Jessica.
Can you hear me? This is Bryn Martin.
Yeah, I thought it was Bryn, but I wasn't sure. Go ahead.
Hi, thank you. Yes, I'm sorry. I tried logging on to Microsoft Teams that it's starting at 7:30 to see if it worked, and I'm driving there now. But my question, she just said she doesn't have much information, but my question was around that curriculum. I was wondering, did she say that was just for grades 8 through 12? And if so, I'm wondering what would be the earliest recommendation, what grades would be recommended to get that, if you know enough to at least pinpoint some that target age.
Fran, this is Kathy. I'm not sure what the ages are for that particular curriculum. I could do a little more research and get back to you on that if you need me to.
Okay, great. And I noticed you said Fayette County might have more information also, so I'll try to call them too. But if you could share more, that'd be good. That'd be wonderful.
Thanks, Bryn. It's good to hear from you. Go ahead, Jessica.
Thank you. This is Jessica Hastings again for minutes. So it's easy. I have two questions with regard to point 3 under social emotional. I believe there was reference to an assessment that may occur with students. Just want to clarify or verify that parents would be informed of that if there is an assessment of students' social emotional, I guess, social emotional status or social emotional situation. So parents, I'm assuming, would be, or not parents, but guardians, parents or guardians would be informed of that if that's taking place.
Hi, Jessica. This is Kathy again. That's a really good question. I need to do some research and get back to you on that.
Okay, thank you. And then my second question is that when students receive social and emotional learning in the mainstream classroom and then receive it during their gifted and talented time, this is a parent question, not an educator, but is there ever any situation where what they learn might be in conflict with one another, knowing that gifted learners may have different social emotional needs?
We're breaking up just a little bit there. I'm not sure I understood your question. Were you asking, well, could you just maybe repeat your question?
Sure, I think I can do it more simple. When students receive social emotional learning in the classroom and then also receive it during their gifted and talented time, knowing that gifted students have different social emotional needs, would there ever be a time where what they learn in that subject matter may be confusing because it's different?
I didn't quite get that last part. Conflicting.
I guess what I'm asking comes through. What I'm asking is, when you have a student who's in the main classroom and they receive social emotional learning during that time, and then they receive social emotional learning during the gifted time, would be an arrangement where what they learn in those two scenarios might be in conflict?
Well, that's hard to know because we don't really know what might be taught in the regular classroom versus what's maybe, supported in a GT, pull out time or time with the counselor.
Okay, I just wanted to bring up that what they learn may be different knowing that gifted learners have different social emotional needs.
Right. Right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? All right, thanks. I think Dr. Roberts was going to address, and Kathy, are you finished?
Yeah.
Dr. Roberts was going to allow a discussion to allow folks to give some feedback about our presentations today, both on the diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, and the best practices. So I'll turn it over to Dr. Roberts.
Thank you. I was happy to be in the country session and hear the teachers from across the state make good suggestions that Kathy was talking about. I am reminded over and over again, even from a conversation early today, that one of the things that we must make sure others know about gifted children is that their needs come from their strengths. And that is very different from when we're talking about the needs of any other children. We usually think as an academic or a social emotional need emanating from something that's behind or a deficit. We must help those we work with understand that it is that strength for the gifted child that creates the need. In a conversation just a few moments ago, I was talking with someone whose child had the opportunity for some advanced learning. And her response was, and she's not nearly as anxious as she was previously. And that's what led me into talking about the fact her need, her strength is being addressed. And when that happens, we are happier. We're more calm. That's why we do gifted ed, to address that need. So let me talk briefly about the gaps. There are 4 gaps that we have that must be addressed with children in general and with gifted children specifically. And the first gap is the belief gap. If you don't believe that this child could be gifted for whatever reason, there's not a chance in the world that that teacher would recommend the child. Then there's the opportunity gap. And students who do not have opportunities to have a wide range of experiences or to learn at an advanced level won't do it. If we're looking at identifying children, any category of giftedness, if they do not have an opportunity to show that ability, grade level stuff is all they encounter, then they'll never be recognized as gifted. So we've got a belief gap to overcome. We have an opportunity gap that we must pay attention to. And then we have the achievement gap. But we know a lot about the achievement gap because we've looked at those data for a long time. And every educator has looked at those. The 4th gap is one that not nearly as many schools have paid attention to, and that's the excellence gap. That's looking at the same groups of children the achievement gap has looked at, but looking at them who have scored at advanced levels, or in Kentucky, that would be distinguished levels. Those data don't show up on all of the charts. We instead take proficient and distinguished and lump them together as we show them. Is that right?
Publicly reported.
It's very different. So if you are not looking at the children who score at the distinguished level. And recently, Susan Weston Perkins did that for us. We were doing a principal cohort meeting. So I do have those data. I actually don't have them to share with you, but they're shocking. They are absolutely shocking. We have some areas, some content areas with distinguished, let's say at the 8th grade level, where there are virtually, as you would report them, 0 kids scoring from that group, or not enough to show on a statistical map at this, the distinguished level. And I think we probably ought to be looking at those data. Kathy, I will send that chart to you, and you could send it out to everyone else to look at it. I think it is something that as a state, we ought to be shocked to see. But until you unravel that, you don't know it. So if I'm looking at the presentation we had from Dr. Fields, we need to be working all the time cooperatively with what is happening in that group. And I'm happy that she will talk about gifted being part of what's there. Comments on what I've said thus far? Jonathan Plucker is the one who introduced the term excellence gap. And we've been talking together about the excellence gap for, I guess, 3 years, maybe it's 4. Time goes pretty fast these days, so it's hard to know. But I think that's something that ought to be in our conversation at KDE, and it ought to be in our conversation right here. What I hear, and of course my sample is probably small, but what I hear is that principals are working very hard to get teachers to bring kids up to proficient. And that is a worthy goal for those who aren't at proficient yet. It is no goal at all for children who are there or beyond. And as Jonathan Plucker said, proficient is only a step along the journey. It is not the destination. But as long as that is the prevalent message in schools, kids who are above or beyond proficiency are often left unchallenged. Now respond to me, especially if that doesn't fit what you see. If what's happening where you are is that everyone is moving on to distinguished, please tell me that. It would make my day.
This is Pauline. I would love, and I am very happy to share with you that in my building, especially in the area of ELA, teachers are working feverishly with students about self-assessment, self-reflection about their math scores. And what has been found by my esteemed colleagues is that when they articulate a goal and they envision that goal, their scores shoot up drastically. And even with students that are already scoring, to my understanding, even with students scoring at proficient and distinguished, they're still improving.
I cheer for that.
And our students that hadn't been scoring, that had been scoring, I believe, at below proficient. There's one example where the student who actually did articulate her goals and reflected, I think her score shot up 30 points. So I applaud my colleagues so much, and that's been a big focus this year.
Undoubtedly, we have fabulous teachers in Kentucky, and that's a perfect example of that. And perhaps what I am worried about is the message to teachers that getting kids to proficient is what the goal is, because it isn't. If we want Kentucky to thrive economically, we're getting kids up to distinguished. We're getting them ready to take the STEM jobs and the jobs in all other fields that require excellence, not being proficient. Proficient is grade level.
Randy Corbin? Yep, okay. Wait just 1 second.
Sorry, I'm having trouble with my mouse to get to the speaker. Well, as a high school principal, I have to say that I don't know any principal who gives the message that proficient is where we stop.
You are
So
right.
I don't know that that is I don't know that that's an accurate statement, because there's no principal that I know that would tell people to stop at proficiency if distinguished was available. I also think that we need to maybe think a little bit about the metric being used to determine if kids are proficient and distinguished. If we don't have any kids who are identified as gifted landing in the distinguished category. So maybe there's a problem with the metric we're using to measure their proficiency or distinguished status, because there's no way that we're identifying as many children as we are as gifted, but they're not scoring what we're determining or what has been determined as distinguished on a test. So maybe there's a problem with the test.
I appreciate your comments. Thank you. I don't mean that we don't have students scoring distinguished. We don't have enough students in some of the groups we look at for the achievement gap that are scoring at that level.
Again, I think a lot of that comes back to the actual test, the metric being used to measure their abilities.
Certainly could be. And what I hear is not that principals say you stop, but they have emphasized, let's get everyone up to proficient. And that message could be taken by the teacher to me. Yeah, that's what will count here. Okay, I have a follow. Does anyone else have a comment? I would like to ask, how do we go from this point with the 3 priorities to making recommendations to KDE as our charge for the council is? We've talked about them for a long time. The next step surely is to make the recommendation. How do we do that? I think that might be a question for you.
Oh, that's a good question, and it's one that we've talked about in our branch. I think that we are already implementing some of the things that the council has recommended, and I think it just behooves us to look at those priorities again, and then maybe give an update of what types of activities are being done at the department that align with the priorities.
Okay, so would it be okay if I suggested that you would put together a list of what is being implemented with the priorities? And then could we have the people working on priority 1, priority 2, and priority 3 to meet virtually sometime between now and the final meeting so that they could make the recommendations and we kind of would wrap it up.
So you're asking if the
Like a
committees that
committee
are
report.
working on Fridays 1, 2, and 3, if they could meet between now and April the 13th to discuss the priorities and wrap it up.
So that when we met in April, we really could have made the recommendations and we would also know what you already had put in place. I suppose the other thing that could happen if we didn't meet virtually between now and then, that's what that meeting could be about. And that we would talk about it and come up with recommendations so that we would set as our goal that by the end of the meeting in April, that recommendations would be ready to send.
Yeah, and the way the agency prefers is that there are committees that meet on site during the meeting because it's publicly information that's available. Because for committees that meet outside, then there's no way for the public to interact with that. So,
Got it.
yeah.
We could do that. Does that sound like it would be the pleasure of the group? And nod, like, help.
So did we make some recommendations previously, and that's, you were gonna provide a list, Kathy, of how those recommendations have been implemented with KDE already? Is that what, did I misunderstand that?
Well, I appreciate your clarifying question because I thought that's what, the recommendations were, the 3 recommendations, that I went over today. I thought those were the recommendations and that's what the council had recommended. But maybe I misunderstood.
Or maybe I misunderstood. By that, do you mean everything that you had under priority 1, 2?
That's the way I understood it, is that those were the recommendations to KDE.
Well, I'll tell you what. Let's look at the April meeting and it's kind of winding it up. I'll learn more about what the recommendations are specifically and we'll be sharing information with you. But it's important for an advisory board to feel like they've done something and that there'll be a little closure on these particular recommendations. And Kathy, you and I work well on together, so we'll figure out what that is and move forward to the next meeting.
Dr. Roberts, something that resonated with me today is the DEIB presentation. I felt like that lended a lot of support and resources toward the gaps 1 and 2. And I know it's easy for academic folks to stay in 3 and 4 and really look at assessment. But I feel like if leaders are empowered to have support strategies, resources, guidance to help have more conversations about 1 and 2, then it may help identify more GT students who may not necessarily been identified in the past.
I couldn't agree more. And I know that then our challenge is how do you get more people to know about it?
Yeah.
So it's great information and there's so many things that we know about that we just absolutely need to have happening in all schools and all districts across the state.
And it's difficult, that's not easy. So the more resources and support we have, best practice sharing and so forth, it's to see how it's done. It helps it. But our role is to get the message out.
It is indeed. Kim, update us on things going on with the Kentucky Association for Gifted Education.
Okay, so our conference is, I'm sorry, you all look frozen all of a sudden, so I'm hoping you're hearing this. Our conference is the 27th and 28th. We'll have an administrators day on Monday, and on that day at the luncheon that we have, we'll also be honoring Lynette Baldwin for her service to gifted education. If you contact Cage, if you have a special memory of Lynette or something, if you contact Cage, they can send you a link to just like a PowerPoint slide, and you can put your memory or a photo or something on there, and then that will all be put together as a kind of memorial to her that will be shown at that time. The only other thing I really have at this time is the Cage Foundation is separate from the Cage Board, but it's still kind of falls under it. And what the Cage Foundation does is they raise money to give directly to students for scholarships for summer programs. So students who apply, they usually meet in late April, and whatever money they have, they try to give out to students to provide scholarships for any special program that they might be doing, whether it's Vampy, whether it's a local, maybe something local, and they just need to apply to the foundation. So it would be really helpful if we can get the word out about that. But we're always looking for fundraising opportunities too. So if you know anything, if you would let us know, that would be great. And I think that's about it right now, because we're having our next meeting, the next board meeting right before the conference. Okay.
Started out, it is the announcement of Gifted Education Month proclamation signing in the rotunda. So I hope each of you is thinking about some way to make Gifted Education Month something that is known and celebrated in your school, your district, your city, whatever that happens to be.
Thank you, Julia. I can't believe we forgot that.
Well, we kind of started out with that today, so it wasn't that it was unknown. There are so many things that are important to talk about, and I think we've touched many of them today. Is there anything else on the agenda?
I believe so. Just closing remarks and the exits.
Does anyone want to add a closing remark?
Could
Does
we
that
just,
matter?
there was a chat. Could we
Yeah.
verify the next meeting date, time, and place?
And if it's in person or virtual. And it's in person, right? April the 13th, in person here in Frankfurt. And also in the chat, I want to make sure and recognize Jessica because it's a big day, big deal for her, because her daughter actually will be speaking at the proclamation today. And so, Jessica, I know you're super proud and excited, and I can tell by the smile on your face right there that it's going to be exciting to hear your daughter speak today. So congratulations on that. That's awesome.
Absolutely. See you soon.
Thank you.
Anything else?
I guess just one housekeeping thing before we close today. If you have any travel reimbursement, please make sure that you email that to me by March the 1st.
Today's February the 1st. So
yes, it gives you a month to get all of your any travel reimbursement that you have into us. And just remember, it needs to be submitted electronically. If you need any help with that, just contact me or Joe, and we'll help you.
And I appreciate everyone's patience with our meeting schedule. It did work out good for us to have a virtual option this time. The weather's been a little tricky and we knew it would be. So I just appreciate your patience with us. And in April, hopefully we'll be able to get on site. It is nice to have everyone together and see everyone. So I really appreciate it. Dr. Roberts, do you want to?
I think it will be important to be here April 13th. We're kind of winding up these recommendations. So put a star on your calendar for that date and we'll see you then. If we don't see you at the CAGE conference, hope you're there. Bye.
Thanks a lot, everyone. Have a good day.